right, welcome to another episode of New Wine UnCorked. I'm Matt Farlow, and next to me is Paul Coughlin, and I'm stoked to be sitting down with Paul today to be discussing the topic that we have at hand. And the title you'll notice below the video is "Don't Bully Me." I'm turning over the bruised cheek, and there's a lot of talk in the Christian realm, especially when it comes to violence or aggression, on what is the appropriate Christian response. Throughout the Bible, followers of the Christian God are called to do good, and we have scripture verses that talk about, well, what is good, to do justice and to love mercy, and even Jesus talks about turning the other cheek. And so today, this issue, in this reality of bullying, we're seeking to confront and to step into head on. Paul has an extensive background in this. He's an expert witness regarding bullying and the law. Fox News contributor. He's appeared on Good Morning America, Nightline, C-SPAN, the LA Times, New York Times, and other media outlets as well. And he's a best-selling author of 8 books, including Freedom from Bullying, parent and teacher resource called Raising Bully-Proof Kids. And so I'm stoked to be sitting down with you, Paul, today. This is a big topic, a big issue that still continues to go through schooling today. I know in junior high, I was on the receiving end of, a number of times of being bullied, but then I also participated with groups and, looking back in what would be defined as bullying others. And so there's kind of some questions as to what is bullying. So just starting off, Paul, thanks for joining today, the New Wine UnCorked. And so how would you, first of all, just define bullying? Because that's a big topic. So give our viewers just an idea, when we're talking about bullying, what is it how is it that you define bullying?
Yeah. Very misunderstood word. And Matt, if it makes you feel any better, many people were both, targets, bystanders, and bullies. Many of us have played around with that behavior, but most people don't become serial bullies. So I'm pretty sure you're not a serial bully. In regard to the definition of bullying, it's gotten to be that anything we don't like now, we call bullying, and then sadly, we want the school to stop it right away. Bullying is not about conflict. It's not about necessarily misunderstanding or miscommunication or drama, a term girls use far more than boys. It's not about those things. Bullying is the deployment of superior power, and that power can be real or perceived. Bullies are very good at perceived power. It's almost always social or relational, what we call relational aggression. So it's the use of superior power designed to intentionally harm another person multiple times. It's not a one-off deal, multiple times for no justifiable reason. It is a campaign of cruelty against another person on purpose, often due to real or perceived differences. But those differences they matter and they don't, because the fact is bullies will use anything in order to humiliate and isolate and sometimes even terrorize another person. So I remember you said previously, the use of masks in schools, and certainly a bully would use that as an opportunity to take a shot at another person if they thought they could get away with it, if it had utility. Mm-hmm. So many of these real or perceived differences, to a non-bully, you look at those and you say, well, why would you pick on another person like that? It's just they're doing it because they can. Mm-hmm. And our goal is to take the payoff away to the bully, which clearly is better for the target, but also much better for the child who bullies as well.
Yeah. So when you've spoken to a number of people, and you said you've been working with bullies and bullying for a while, what are some of the ways that you approach this topic with students, especially in the university, high school and junior high, because there's a stigma. You don't want to admit that you're being bullied because in the American culture, to be bullied is a sign of weakness. So how do you even approach this topic with students?
Yeah, so I have three kids, and one of the things I've done with my kids is the beginning of a school year, where I would say, hey, I need to know what's going on because, like, for example, October is anti-bullying month. Why is that? Because studies show that in September, bullies go shopping, not just for school clothes, they go shopping for targets, and they cull from the group people they're pretty sure will take it. Bully's not looking for a fight. A bully wants to overwhelm. So they look for the kind of kid they can overwhelm. So I don't want my kids to be that. And so what could be at the beginning of the school year just a one-off dumb thing that was said, it was cruel, it was mean. I said, I need to know about this because it might establish a pattern of behavior. And that's really what we want to do, is establish a pattern of behavior and then bring that to the school. But in order to get your kid to buy in, it's really important to say, together we'll make that decision. I will not make that decision, and go off to your school like Joan of Arc and, throwing spears at people. That's the big fear and concern, is their parents are going to make life harder for them.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to open up the lines of communication. We have to get them to feel comfortable giving you this information, and then you document. And if you have to, you bring it to the school. But there's a more excellent way, as Paul might say in the Gospels, and that is to help your child become the kind of kid that bullies get no payoff from. And I had mentioned it earlier, Matt, and I was just joking, but I want to start someday a foundation called the Punch in the Face Foundation. No, I'm joking, but I'm just using it as illustration. The sooner a bully gets direct and immediate feedback for his or her behavior, the better off that target is going to be, and better off the kid who bullies is going to be. Statistically, a serial bully is 5 to 6 times more likely to commit a felony by their early 20s, and 4 to 5 times more likely to abuse their future spouse and future children. This is a lifestyle choice that they take. And statistically, if we can't reach them by about age 12 to 14 and they continue that behavior, they're headed for prison. So we really have to give them direct feedback for what they're doing to others. They will be better off, and certainly that target is going to be better off as well. So what I did with my kids is to train them or encourage them to just be more assertive than they might otherwise be. Assertive body language, a slight smile on their face. Confident people have a slight smile on their face. Immediate verbal comebacks are very important, both face-to-face and online. The word whatever, we highly recommend. I know that some people, particularly in the church, those who have the spiritual gift of being easily offended, they don't like the word whatever. We like it because it's immediate, it's dismissive, but it's not an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's not revenge talk. If we want this really nice response to bullies, unfortunately, bullies eat through nice responses. That does not stop them. We need to show some form of strength, assertiveness in the face of a serial bully.
And so that brings up this idea then, strength and assertiveness. Two things that I want to get into, but first, before we get into the scripture and Jesus and all that, the goodness with strength and how is it? What have you found with bullying? And maybe this isn't the talk that it's been, but the mental trauma that comes about as we've gotten, these years have gone where people are now focusing more on mental health. When I was teaching in the early 2000s in high school, it started to come about where teachers were taking mental health days, and so the things that as a high school teacher, I had, a handful of students who I could see got picked on. And it's funny because even the language used to be, well, this is just being picked on. And now we have, properly identified it as bullying. But what about in your experience in discussing bullying and you talk about this a little bit with your organization, which I meant to mention is the Protectors. And we'll get the website on there too for people to go and visit to get some of Paul's work. Is just amazing, especially if anyone's around kids, and this deals with adults as well. But
Yeah.
the mental turmoil that comes from bullying. So how do you step into that, and how do you identify the mental trauma with bullying?
Yeah, bullying is where the harm is. To get your feelings hurt every once in a while, that hurts. It's like a sunburn, but it dissipates and usually goes away. Bullying is the lasting pain. Bullying is kind of like a psychological cancer. It eats at a person. It's literally life diminishing when you have this concerted campaign of cruelty against you, usually by 3 to 5 kids. That's a very difficult thing to battle against. Psychologically, the Wesley Society of Australia followed serial targets into adulthood, found that 7 out of 10 had difficulty forming lasting adult relationships. They specifically struggled with anger management problems. We think bullies can't control their anger. It's not about anger. They can control their hostility just fine. It's targets of bullying who have a hard time with anger management. They're the ones who are often passive aggressive, for example. They struggle with trust issues in the workplace and in personal relationship. But here's really the toughest thing. They found that they struggled with resentment. And resentment is one of the leading negative emotions tethering people to drug and alcohol abuse. So we say things, particularly in the church, we say things like, that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger, right? We think we're quoting the Bible. We're not. That's Friedrich Nietzsche, who very much did not like the Bible in many places. He also said, man is the cruelest of all beasts. They found University of London 2011, and this study has been replicated by others, so it's not a standalone. They found that bullying can literally change the DNA of a child. We used to think that DNA was immutable. It's not. And the gene that it can change is the gene involved in mood regulation. Mm-hmm. So a target of serial bullying has a hard time regulating their, can anyway, have a hard time regulating their mood. So no, it's not harmless. It causes sometimes lasting harm. In fact, every once in a while, Matt, you'll see in the paper someone who not only will not go to the class reunion, but they brought a gun to the class reunion because they haven't forgot what was done to them. And until you walk in those shoes, I've walked in those shoes. Those are difficult waters to ford.
I mean, and the mental trauma, if people remember some of that's kind of sparked this issue of where kids living out their resentment comes from, like you think about all the way back to Columbine, and those 2 boys had a lot of pent up aggression and anger. And for parents though, so that's the one side of it where their kid is actually, and I know a lot of parents, don't want to ever believe that their kid could be a bully.
Right.
Talk a lot about if your kid's being bullied or you're being bullied. How do we though see the other sides so that we don't want our kids to be bullies, but are there also indicators that your child or maybe even you, unbeknownst to yourself, are taking on characteristics of bullying someone else? So how do we pay attention to that's not happening in ourselves, or if we have children, that they're also not participating in bullying someone?
Yeah. Real quickly, in regard to a target of bullying, finally learning how to stand up for themselves. Parents are worried they're going to become a bully. Though we all have the seed of bullying in us, it doesn't activate that often, particularly in regard to serial bullying. Acute bullying, if we're honest, a lot of us have played around with that behavior, but we gave it up. Our conscience got the better of us. For whatever reason, a serial bully keeps going. I liken them to the dog that got the chicken. The thrill of the hunt is just so strong that you can't stop that dog from doing that. I mean, they just love it too much. Bullying is pleasurable. Bullying is fun. Bullying is electrifying. Controlling and dominating another person, feels wonderful. No, it's pleasurable. It's a perverse pleasure. It is a sin. But as the scripture says, there's pleasure in sin for a season. And bullying has that. Now, there's a tremendous downside to it as well. You end up being one of the worst people imaginable as an adult if you're not careful. So there's that. In regard to not wanting a child to be a bully, bullying doesn't stem from anger, it stems from disdain and contempt. Bullying comes from a person who looks down their nose on other people for real or perceived differences. And that's why it's very similar to racism, bigotry, sexual harassment, even genocide. Because in order to get to those behaviors, you have to justify your behavior. In order to justify it, we always make the other person a less than. And we almost always do it by taking their name away and giving them a derogatory name. So for example, I was supposed to speak in Rwanda through Association of Christian Schools International last May, but it got canceled due to COVID. I was supposed to talk about the connection between bullying and genocide. And as we know that in the 25th anniversary, there in Rwanda, your neighbor was no longer your neighbor. Your neighbor was a cockroach. Those are the names they gave to people from warring tribes. It's on purpose. It's in order to take their God-given dignity, value, and worth away. And so therefore you're superior to them. So all that to say in regard to parents, watch your disdain and your contempt. Watch how you speak about other people, because your child is a mini biographer. Through the umbilical cord of modeling, you're teaching your child to look down their nose on other people because that's what you are doing, often through sarcasm and things like this. And even in the church, I mean, many of us don't even realize that we're doing that. But once we kind of step back and say, man, I've been really speaking badly about other people. Our kids are watching and they just do it. And then another thing, Matt, is really important. And this came from a study that came out about a year ago in most of the papers. They found that parents who don't require their children to do something pro-social when they witness bullying, they found that those kids, because their parents never told them they couldn't bully, are more likely to bully. So we actually, at dinner time is a sacred time. So as we're sitting down with our young kids and we require them, no, if you have our last name, you will not passively sit by and watch another person get bullied, and you certainly will not bully. Those are the conversations we need to have. They need to be early. They need to be often. And the great thing is, as Abraham Lincoln said, the great thing about the future, it comes one day at a time. So we just need to keep repeating this information to our kids. They'll get it. They'll move forward. They'll become bigger, stronger people in the process.
Yeah, and so the topic for our this episode is the idea of turning the other cheek, the bruised cheek. In theology, we talk about the bruised reed. Jesus was the bruised reed, and arguably he could be the historical character of an onslaught of bullying, and never once raising his voice or his hand, depending on how people read it. So in light of this commands of loving the other, or even loving your enemies, turning the other cheek, how then are Christians to understand bullying, standing up for it? You mentioned a couple of times, standing up for it does not make one a bully. But where's that that division, that wall, that line there of, hey, I'm standing up, and yet if I go one step further, I cross the line now into bullying. So how do you reckon with Jesus when it comes to bullying?
The whole idea that he was this honorary pacifist is a work of fiction, absolute work of fiction. He was a whole person. Our word for integrity really means wholeness. And to be whole means that you possess a spectrum of virtues and values and behaviors. And this whole idea that he never said a strong word, it just does not bear scrutiny. In fact, it's right up there with that work of fiction, very popular. Brown was his name. Dan.
Da Vinci Code, and
Da Vinci Code, that's as fictitious as the Da Vinci Code. It will not bear scrutiny, especially if you look at the Gospel of Mark. So yeah, Jesus stood up to bullies. Biggest bullies of his day were the Pharisees, Sadducees. He stood against them. When Mary was being bullied in the Bible, the Gospel of Mark doesn't tell us which disciple was bullying, but most scholars believe it was Judas. Imagine that. And Jesus said, "Leave her alone." So he stood up for a person who was being bullied. We obviously know about cleaning the temple, the money changers. That was a premeditated act of aggression. You could even argue violence. By the way, our understanding of the word violence comes from the word violence comes from our understanding of to violate. I argue that you are not violating another person when you are defending your own dignity, value, and worth. Now, we do have some scriptures, particularly 1st and 2nd Peter, where he writes about laying your rights down. But he writes about, and others do too, is an important distinction. He's writing about laying our rights down when it has to do with our faith, of being persecuted for our faith. Your average 4th grader on a playground in America is not being bullied due to his or her faith. That kid is being bullied for real or perceived differences, a speech impediment, the way he or she walks, the way they talk, being socially awkward, maybe even the shape of their ears. None of that has to do with being persecuted for their faith. None of it. So in regard to these big misunderstandings, in regard to how our children were not given to us to be the plaything of other people. And they're too valuable for that. And let me speak particularly, now I'm going into preaching, sorry, but you lit me up. You lit me up, man.
Yeah.
No is one of the greatest spiritual words we will ever say. No on behalf of ourselves, but no on behalf of others. Look at the people who changed history. Look at the people who make us weep. We think of Lincoln, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. You think of Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Wilberforce, Martin Luther King. The list goes on and on. What? And I'm sorry for Mother Teresa. I mean, whoever your hero is, right? Why? Why are they heroic? It's because they said no. And when it really resonates within the tuning fork of our soul, it's when they said no to what the creator of this universe and our personal God said no to. Some of us are sinning because we don't get angry enough. We don't get indignant, which means much to grieve. So, and we get this because of this fiction in regard to an understanding who Jesus is and our faith. And one of the most tortured scriptures, Matt, in what we call the theater of bullying, is turn the other cheek. And one of the people who was given that tortured scripture, you probably remember Frank Peretti. And I interviewed him for my book, Free Us from Bullying. And I've interviewed probably over 1,000 people. I used to be an editor of a newspaper and a reporter at a talk show. And I have to say, I think this remains my favorite interview. 2.5 hours, we talked about his experience with bullying. He cried. He's 65 years old at the time of the interview. He cried during the interview. He got angry. And his parents absolutely would not allow him to defend his own dignity and value and worth to other kids. And as a result, he said it was like blood in the water. He referred to himself as chum. And they knew it. They could sense that, Frank is an easy score. I can make fun of him. I can demean him. And statistically, kids who bully up until around their sophomore year gain and maintain social status. You become more popular by being awful to another person. And in my interview with Frank, he said bullying did not make him a stronger person. It made him a wretch. He said that he dealt with the effects of bullying well into adulthood. So turn the other cheek real quickly has nothing to do with a 4th grader being bullied on a playground. I believe it's out of Matthew chapter 5, and it's one of 3 examples that we are given. and which there are behaviors that have legal consequences. If I can remember correctly, if a man in authority asks you to porter 1 mile, you porter 2. If someone asks for your shirt, give to them your cloak as well. And then the third one, if someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to them your left cheek. These all have legal consequences. You didn't have to do those 3 things. You could have stood by the law. What Jesus is saying there is it's in an answer to a question. What is it like to be, if you want to be my disciple, this is the kind of person you need to be. What he's saying is the law is not your benchmark. If you want to be my disciple, I want you to be known for other things. And we know what those other things are, because at the very end of the chapter, he tells us, he says, have a generous spirit, give to those who ask. Nothing to do with accepting abuse from another kid on a playground. And I would add, as an adult, accepting abuse from another adult as well, because particularly, Matt, I think psychologically, women are more likely to be damaged by bullying. And there are nefarious people out there. Roughly 15% of the US population are what we would call almost a psychopath. Mm-hmm. And there are nefarious people who will take advantage of a woman's more accommodating spirit, and they use it against them. And unfortunately, our precious daughters have not been taught well and encouraged to say no. And when I stand up before high schoolers, I've stood up for tens of thousands of high schoolers, and I say to the young ladies in particular, your no is true because you said it's true. You deserve, you do not owe anyone an explanation as to why you said no. Your no is true because you said it's true. We need to set our daughters free from the opposite of from the things that bring about this idea that you have to acquiesce, particularly to a malevolent individual.
Yeah. So what? Because the turning the other cheek, in light of what other things that Jesus talks about, and this idea, in the Gospel of John brings up this idea of a grain of wheat must die or fall to the ground in order for it to sprout. And so I think the thing within the church is we see accounts in it is playing out dramatically in front of us with the president of the United States. And maybe it's too political for people to step in, but some of the behaviors that you're talking about, we see exhibited through his actions. Anyone who's been in the church has been under a pastor or pastors who seem to exhibit exactly what you're talking about. So how is it though that coming from a Christian standpoint, because we're talking specifically from the scriptures and how they teach people, when it talks about this idea of surrender, self-sacrifice, one of the key things that Jesus does before going to the cross is sit down with his disciples and say, how I live, the breaking of my body, here's the supper that we're going to eat together that's going to represent how I lived and how I'm calling you to live, to break your body and to be poured out. Again, and I hear what you're saying with the turning of the cheek and the violence and aggression against, when we're talking with ourselves, even, adults, how is it that we discern what tends to be then stepping over that line that is abusive, or is the rightful standing up for faith, to have this within you, to give your hope. It's done peacefully, but even still, that can be an aggressive act. So what are some of the ways that you coach people to know the difference that says, yes, hey, this is not a bullying act, or even though it feels aggressive, this is a proper, righteous stand of faith?
Yeah. Well, let me go back again. Some of what you said is beyond my pay scale, right? My lane is adolescent bullying, but also workplace bullying as well. As you know, I work with the Baltimore Ravens and help them. A lot of work we do there has to do with forgiveness. You'd be surprised how many professional athletes can remember the first, middle, last name of that coach who bullied them. They can remember what their wife looked like, what their wife smelled like. These are things I hear. I mean, it is indelible that goes into their mind. So let's keep in mind that most people are not being bullied due to their faith. in regard to a active passivity, I think that's what I would call it. If a person chooses to lay down their rights because they feel that is what their faith requires them to do, then more power to you. And I think obviously that's the case for some people, but it's hardly the case for kids in regard to adolescent bullying. One of the terms that I like to refer to, for example, is peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. When I was speaking at Oregon's School Resource Officer Association on Mount Hood last July, I threw that truth bomb out there in a secular audience, and you could hear a pin drop. I think for many of those people, they had never heard that before, because I pointed out that Jesus took that term from a Roman military term. It's only mentioned twice in the New Testament, and that's with Jesus and his half-brother James. And it means those who actively bring conflict to an end. That is more police officer power than it is Sunday school volunteer, provided that policing power is not inordinate. That's a very important distinction in there. So Jesus actually praises people, calls them children of God, who actively bring conflict to an end. So this idea that we become honorary pacifists, we just listened to Peter, Paul, and Mary, and once we become Christians, is just simply not true. It is not accurate. And another person who obviously intellectual, C.S. Lewis, wrote an entire essay about why he's not a pacifist. So that's the long and the short of it for me. We have the freedom to be assertive. I just, one thing I would point out too, in regard to our children and even our own lives, of those who remember the original American Idol, right? The three original judges. Let's see if I can remember. Paula Abdul. She's an example. There's a reason why those three were chosen. They represent the three basic personality types, right? There's more, but roughly three. And for our purposes. And Paul Abdul's kind of passive. Passive people are gracious, but they're not truthful. So Paul Abdul will tell you you're a good singer when you're not. You know, they're just not truthful. And then you had Simon Cowell, who back then I think put half of America into counseling, right? He was the aggressive personality, and aggressive people can be truthful, but they're not gracious. And so to be truthful and not gracious is like performing surgery without anesthesia. It gets the job done, but it causes unnecessary suffering. I would argue that in regard to more of a Christ-like personality, not persona, that we are to be more like Randy Jackson, the one in the middle. And he was the assertive personality. Assertive people are gracious and truthful at the same time. It is often an art, not a science. It takes time to get there, and it's hard to replicate something you haven't seen. But you'll see that assertive person who handles themselves with aplomb, for example, and they don't bow, they don't fall, they stand up for their beliefs and stuff, but they don't attack other people in the process. They don't demean other people. It doesn't mean they don't disagree, and maybe even fervently, but they don't demean the other person. And that's where I think we need to be. And certainly we need it now more than ever. We are an increasingly coarsening society, without a doubt, and it seems to be accelerating. So my hope would be we can be true peacemakers, where we can settle some differences and treat each other with dignity and respect in the process.
Yeah, it's with kids, it's interesting. And you said that kids are mini biographers, and it's so true. They pick up on so much. When we were taking our kids to church when they were young, in the elementary and ages, and we'd keep them in the service with us because we wanted to do church together. People thought, oh my gosh, we separate kids, and we don't do things together. And we found, though, that the more we did things together with our children, the more open they were with us, and they brought us into their world. And you think, as a parent, that no matter how much you pour out love into your kids, that they're going to be immune to some of these painful realities of life, and bullying is one of those things.
Mm.
And so then you put the faith in there, and think, oh well, they're going to over out love. I talk about this. I teach university students, and I tell them, love has to outlove hate. But that's a hard thing in today's culture of consumerism and this drive for to be number one. Because typically, at least in my experience, in working as a pastor of a church too, I've seen it where the drive overcomes and overwhelms people's desires. And so then even a Christian um, forgets that first call to love the Lord and then love their neighbor as themselves. And so, how is it that when you're actually meeting with someone who is been doing the bullying, what are some of the key aspects to help them see how their behavior is bullying?
Yeah, two things.
Loving.
They call it something else. It's not bullying. I'm just playing around. I'm joking around. And then you point out, well, what's interesting is that you say you're joking around. You think it's good natured, but do you ever realize that for it to be joking around, it goes both ways.
Mm.
You realize you're piling it on this person, and he doesn't pile it back. That's not joking around. That's not, well, that is joking around to some degree, but that's not good. Sorry, it's my dog Alder. And he will probably continue for a while. That's just who he is. Well, there it is. So they call us up now, so you got to take that away. And for example, my oldest son, and the oldest ones tend to bully the youngers, is kind of how it goes. And he would constantly say, no, I'm just having fun with my middle son. I said, no, what? I look at him, he's not having fun. You're the one who's having a good time. He's not having, in fact, he's crying. I said, but why is that? Why aren't you crying? And by the way, pal, why aren't you picking on people your own size? I noticed you're picking on people smaller than you. Why is that? I would say things like, now again, I come from the more muscular, my parents are Northern European, right? So they're pretty, my parents are Irish immigrants. So they were fairly no nonsense when it came to child rearing. And I would say my oldest, he's no longer a bully anymore. He was never a serial bully. He just played around with it. I say, when you diminish your behavior the way you're doing it, that's what criminals do. Criminals don't own up to their behavior, and you're acting like a criminal. And I would let that truth bomb sit, because I grew up in the tyranny of bullying in my home. And I needed a protector. I needed someone to speak the truth in love to another. I call it opening a can of Jesus, speaking the truth in love. And I did that. And I tell you, to this day, Matt, they are best friends. My oldest son and my middle son. My oldest son's in Sioux Falls. My youngest son is in Shanghai right now. They are best friends, and they wouldn't be if I hadn't done that. And let me speak to the men in particular who are listening. Fathers, statistically, in a home where fathers allow bullying to take place, it's far more likely to be damaging. There's something, statistically, that's just how it works. I don't know why, but that's how it works. It is your responsibility to your family and your children that you stand against bullying and in your home. And I know of which I speak. I have had demanding jobs, and I would drive home from those jobs with 3 kids, waiting at home. And I had to detox in the car because I couldn't stand my job and all that sort of stuff. And what happens with us men, we produce at work and we consume at home. Can't be. We must produce in both theaters, in both venues. And if you don't, it's a sin. You cannot let that happen in your home, because there's a Norse proverb, brothers will fight and become each other's bane. And that is what will happen in your home if you don't stand up and do something about it. I did. Now, I was kind of fortunate in that respect, Matt, because I knew what it was like. I hate bullying. I hate it. By the way, God hates it too. Of the 7 behaviors that's listed God finds an abomination, every one of them has to do with bullying as well. So God hates it, we should hate it as well. So that's what I did as a parent, and I stood against it pretty regularly. In fact, I did something very unorthodox, Matt. So my oldest would bully my youngest, my middle son rather. No one would try to bully my youngest, Abby. She's very quick with her right hand. So her boys got it pretty, her brothers got it pretty good. Anyway, I sat my son down, Elliot and Garrett, and I said, Elliot, I know you're bullying your brother. I know you're doing it in the other room where I can't see it. I know you're doing it. So I turned to Garrett and I said, Elliot or Garrett, you now have my permission to bite your brother as hard as you possibly can when he does that to you. And I said, but don't bite him on the face because that's expensive. That's plastic surgery. And I said to Garrett, I said, a great place to bite him is the back of the upper arm because it really hurts and you can sneak attack him the way that he sneak attacks you. Matt, you might take a guess what happened?
I probably awkwardly said, no, I don't want to bite him. Or
suddenly a halo grew over Elliot's head. Suddenly, he thought, wow, maybe I shouldn't do this. Now, again, bullying's unequal power. So what did I do? Garrett was smaller. I mean, what happens, Garrett would, slug Elliot, and Elliot would just laugh. Elliot's like a big German farmhand, right? And Garrett's on the smaller side like me. He's like an elf. I'm a tall elf, but I'm an elf. And so it was unequal power. What I did is I gave Garrett the freedom to defend himself, like truly defend himself. That fundamentally changed their relationship. It equaled the playing ground. He never bit him.
Yeah, I think it's the reason why it's for me this issue of bullying, because I mean, junior high, many of us grow up and we have aspects and experiences of bullying. I think the problem is that we see then this play out, especially in culture today with the tension, the social unrest. We see, because if bullying is not hit head on, then we see how it can manifest itself in group bullying, where one group bullies another group. And we see this throughout the course of history with slavery and the racial tensions that we have, especially that we're dealing with and we're entering into. It's not that it hasn't gone on over history. We just haven't dealt with it. And I feel like this issue of bullying is front and center as to, well, why is one race think that it's been okay to oppress or push down another race, and no one knows what to call it other than it's absolutely racism, but there's something motivating it. And you even mentioned this idea of the 7 deadly sins, the abomination. God hates these sins, but in each of the sins is one person or group bullying someone else.
Believing they're superior to others, without a doubt. In regard to racism, again, they are links in an evil chain. And by the way, in regard to the self-esteem movement, what's very interesting, the groups of people who have excessive self-esteem: drunk drivers, racists, and bullies. So it's inordinate self-esteem. It is self-love, not self-hate, that tends to bring people into those worlds. As the son of immigrants and somewhat of a difficult upbringing, I have experienced difficulties and hardship that many people of color probably haven't. But in regard to what our brothers and sisters of color are trying to tell us, is that they're not arguing that other people haven't experienced difficulty, pain, and suffering, the loss of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's not what they're arguing. This is what they're arguing, and they're right. That their skin color has been a barrier to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For me, that has never been the case, and probably for you as well, but it has been for others. I'd like to give one example. I was leaving a job in journalism. And then when I was leaving, I have a degree in journalism, all that kind of stuff. And when I was leaving that job, my publisher said that she would never hire an African-American to take my place. And just to deal with stereotypes, she was active in the Democratic Party and was an ardent feminist. She loved to tell me how much of a feminist she was. Isn't that something? So I thought about that, and how frankly evil that is, that some man or woman who had a degree in journalism busted their rear end like I did, worked all the way through. I worked almost 40-hour weeks regularly through college. They probably did as well. That they would not get a job due to the color of their skin. That is real. And Matt, I'll tell you, when I spend time in both public and private Christian schools, work with them regularly. This year different compared to other years. And I get a chance to sit down with people of color, kids of color. They will tell me that they have been called every despicable name you can imagine. Maybe not at that school, but it's often on the bus and by people driving by as they're walking to and from school. It is real. They are demeaned and devalued. And it's not a radical belief that we can join and help battle that. And I've been battling that in my presentations for years, because I put up a picture of Elizabeth Eckhart. You might remember Elizabeth Eckhart of the Little Rock Nine, one of the most famous photojournalistic photos, I think, of last century. You got Elizabeth in the foreground, the white lady in the background. And what I do there is I talk about how it was once okay to look down your nose in America due to the color of another person's skin. Still happens today. It's evil and it's racism. But then I take Elizabeth Eckhart and I do a silhouette of her. And I said, but you know, some of us are looking down our nose on people, maybe not for the color of their skin, but by the way they walk, the way they talk, about social anxiety. And then if I'm at a Christian school, at a public school, I just encourage them to close their eyes and think of the person who they put in that silhouette, and then just say their name to themselves. In Christian schools, I go a step further and I say, can you pray a blessing for that person? This is important because in order to be racist, in order to be a bully, you take the person's name away and you give them a different name. We must help our children, even adults, reclaim the name of the person with which we disagree or may hold in some degree disdain and contempt.
Yeah, and that's just a great point. And that's why for those of us who, if you watch protest, and especially in light of things going on when they say the name, there's meaning in that, because the naming is personalizing. And I teach in my theology classes, I tell the students all the time, look, Jesus came to rehumanize the human. You know, he came to inject within each one of us this ability, this willingness, this openness to see the person as a person, not a devalued object. Because when we objectify them, it's not just sexual or objectifying, it's also personal objectifying, where then they've just become, it's easier to discard an object than it is to look at a person in the eyes, you know, and discard them.
Amen.
Yeah, well, we're going to continue this conversation because I want to, Paul and I were talking before, and it'd be great to have some pastor friends too as well, because this happens within the church, within the Christian context, more times than we're even aware of. And so the conversation needs to continue. And below this video, you'll see, because if you've gone and you're on our YouTube page right now, just hit subscribe. And anytime a video goes up, like it, you will be informed of it. But underneath this video right now, if you hit show more, you'll see the information there for Paul and his organization called the Protectors, protectors.org. It's right there. The link's on there for you to go. It's the only faith-centered organization helping Christian schools across the world for more than a decade now to reduce bullying through this effective and evidence-based program. And so this is something that the churches need. This is something that schools need. So for any of you out there who have been wondering how it is that we confront this or even talk about it, Paul is an active resource. He's got experience in this. He's got the books to back it up, but he also is one who has gone forward in this personally and led the way in the discussions, the dialogues, and the teaching. He's got curriculum, he's got the books, and is willing to sit down and discuss this with any of you. So be mindful of that, to reach out, because the first step for any of us in addressing bullying is to take that first step and learn education to confront. And so we're going to continue this talk with Paul. We totally appreciate you hanging out and spending time with us today as Paul and I are able to talk through this. Again, protectors.org. I'll throw that up there. That's underneath the video. We thank you, Paul, for sitting down and just getting into this. And I look forward to the many conversations that we're going to have about this. And so thank you for your time this morning and today. And hopefully, as we continue to push into peacemaking, it will be the confrontation of violence, and there will be the confrontations that are necessary, done so in like what that New Wine Skins we like to say, there needs to be the gentleness of a dove, but there's the shrewdness of the serpent. There is this active confronting of the reality of bullying. And so thank you, Paul, for the work that you're doing. We'll continue this. Thank you, folks, for watching. As always, you can you subscribe for videos coming on. You can check this out on anchor.fm/New Wineskins for the podcast, because this will go up and there will be a podcast that you can listen to and continue this dialogue that we have with bullying. So, Paul, again, thank you for your time. For those of you that have been watching, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of New Wine UnCorked. Until the next time that we meet, we'll see you on the flip side.